She didn't mean to ruin his suit. She didn't mean to meet his eyes afterward and feel something shift quietly inside her chest, like a door she'd kept locked for years had just been nudged open by a stranger's smile. Lauren had mastered the art of keeping people at a comfortable distance. Reed had mastered the art of making that distance feel suddenly unreasonable. They were wrong for each other in every logical way. So why did one spilled glass of wine feel like the beginning of something neither of them was prepared to survive? If this story already has your attention, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter, drop a like, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from today?
Chapter 1.
The rooftop bar of the Mercer had that particular Manhattan energy on a Saturday night, all warm Edison bulbs strung between exposed steel beams, the distant hum of the city rising 12 floors below like a living thing that never quite slept. Lauren Calloway stood near the edge of the crowd, her yellow dress, a color she would never have chosen for herself, catching the ambient glow in ways that felt almost accusatory. She held a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, like it was the only reliable thing in the room, which frankly it was. She hated weddings, not the idea of them, not entirely. She hated the particular social arithmetic of weddings, the way everyone became a variable in some equation about where your life was supposed to be by now. Jessica and Mark's wedding was no exception. Lauren had said yes to the invitation mostly out of guilt and partly out of the misguided belief that open bars made everything manageable. So far, the bar was doing its best. "You look like someone who'd rather be debugging code than dancing," said a voice behind her. She turned too quickly. Her elbow caught the stem of her glass. The wine didn't fall so much as launch, a slow, cinematic arc of deep red that landed with devastating precision across the left lapel of a charcoal Tom Ford suit. The silence that followed lasted approximately 1 century. "I am so—" Lauren started. "Normally," the man said, looking down at his jacket with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and surrender. "People buy me a drink before ruining my clothes." He looked up. And that was the problem, because looking up meant looking at her, and looking at her apparently meant actually looking, with dark eyes that held a particular kind of steadiness that Lauren found immediately inconvenient. He was tall in the way that felt deliberate, jawline like an architectural decision, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth that suggested he found the universe quietly hilarious. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Or the suit, whichever is more appropriate." "Reed," he said, extending his hand, the unsoiled one. "Lauren." She shook it. His grip was warm, unhurried. "I'm genuinely sorry about your jacket." "The jacket has had worse nights." He glanced at the spreading stain with something like affection, though I'm curious what kind of evening ends with a full glass of Cabernet becoming airborne. Avoidance strategy gone wrong. His eyebrow lifted, just slightly. Avoiding someone specific or weddings in general? Weddings in general, she paused. The dancing, the speeches, the relentless implication that— She stopped herself. "You don't need my entire manifesto." "I actually might," Reed said. "You were just getting to the interesting part." Something about the way he said it, unhurried, genuinely curious, made Lauren recalibrate. Most people responded to her honesty with polite discomfort. This man was leaning into it like it was a conversation worth having at 9 p.m. with wine on his jacket. The city exhaled below them. Somewhere inside, the DJ had transitioned into something slow and inevitable. Lauren became suddenly aware of how close they were standing, the kind of proximity that happens in crowds without anyone consciously choosing it, and that his cologne was cedar and something warmer beneath it, the kind that didn't announce itself so much as settle. "You're not going to ask me to dance, are you?" she said. "I'm going to ask you something more dangerous than that." Reed tilted his head slightly, and there it was, a gesture so small it barely registered, except that Lauren registered it completely. "I'm going to ask you what you actually think about tonight." She looked at him. The question was too open to be deflected easily, and something in his eyes made deflection feel like the wrong choice, like choosing the wrong door in a house you'd been trying to find for a long time. "I think," Lauren said slowly, "that I've been invisible all evening, and then in approximately 4 seconds I managed to ruin a very expensive suit and have the most interesting conversation I've had in months." She paused, which is either embarrassing or efficient, depending on how you look at it. Reed laughed, real and unhurried, the kind that didn't perform itself. "Efficient," he said. "Definitely efficient." The lights above them flickered once, warmly, as the wind shifted from the direction of the Hudson. Lauren looked at him for 1 second longer than she intended to, then looked away toward the city, all that electric geography spreading out beneath them, all those lives running parallel and oblivious. She didn't know his last name. She didn't know what he did or where he lived or what he looked like in ordinary daylight. She knew the weight of his voice and the particular quality of his attention, and she knew, with the quiet certainty of something she couldn't yet name, that the stained jacket in his hands had just become the most expensive accident she'd ever caused. And somehow, standing there in the yellow dress she'd never have chosen, Lauren Calloway didn't mind at all.
Chapter 2.
Monday arrived the way Mondays always did in Manhattan, without apology. Lauren's studio occupied the 4th floor of a converted building in Soho, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with the kind of natural light that made design work feel almost spiritual. She'd built Calloway Creative from a freelance operation running off her kitchen table into a 12-person agency with clients she actually respected. The office smelled like fresh espresso and printer ink, and the hum of her team working was on most mornings the closest thing she had to peace. This was not most mornings. "The Harmon Legal Group confirmed," said Priya, her project manager, dropping a folder onto Lauren's desk without breaking stride. "Kick-off meeting Wednesday at 10, their office, Midtown." Lauren flipped the folder open. Standard briefing request, brand refresh, website redesign, updated collateral, for a firm expanding its Manhattan presence. Clean, straightforward, well-budgeted. Exactly the kind of project she'd been hoping to land since January. She should have felt only professional satisfaction. Instead, her eyes landed on the partner contact listed at the bottom of the brief. Reed Callahan, senior partner. The espresso she'd just sipped turned into something more complicated in her chest. The Harmon Legal Group occupied 3 floors of a glass tower on 52nd Street, the kind of building that reflected the sky so precisely it seemed to be having a conversation with it. Lauren arrived 4 minutes early, which was her version of exactly on time, wearing a slate-grey blazer over a fitted black turtleneck, her portfolio bag over one shoulder. Professional, composed, completely unaffected. She repeated that last part to herself in the elevator. The conference room was already occupied when she walked in. 2 associates setting up a presentation screen, a senior partner she recognized from the firm's website, and Reed, standing at the far window with his phone in his hand, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow in the particular way of someone who'd already been working for hours. He looked up when she entered. There was exactly 1 second, one quiet, loaded second, where neither of them acknowledged what the other was clearly remembering. Then Reed smiled, the professional version, the one that gave nothing away except intelligence, and crossed the room. "Ms. Calloway." His handshake was firm, appropriate, utterly correct. "Thank you for coming in." "Mr. Callahan." Her voice was even. "Looking forward to the project." If anyone else in the room noticed the slight pause that followed, a pause with the specific texture of 2 people actively choosing not to say something, they gave no indication. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Lauren presented her agency's approach. Research first, visually driven, built around the firm's evolving identity rather than generic legal aesthetics. She'd done her homework. She spoke about typography and color psychology and digital user experience with the fluency of someone who had spent years learning exactly how design shaped perception. Reed listened the way she remembered him listening at the wedding, with that particular, unhurried attention that felt less like evaluation and more like genuine interest. He asked 3 questions, each one cut precisely to the most nuanced layer of what she'd presented. The 3rd question made her pause half a second before answering. Afterward, as the associates gathered their things and the senior partner stepped out for a call, Lauren was sliding her portfolio back into her bag when she heard him behind her. For what it's worth, Reed said, his voice lower now, stripped of the meeting room register. The presentation was exceptional. She turned. He was closer than the room required, in the way that had happened at the wedding. Not inappropriately, not obviously, just precisely close enough to register. "Thank you," she said. "You asked good questions. I had good material to work with." The corner of his mouth lifted, not the professional smile, the other one. The one she recognized from 12 floors up with wine in the air between them. "This is going to be an interesting project." "It's a brand refresh," Lauren said. "Fairly standard." "I wasn't talking about the brand refresh." The air in the room changed temperature by approximately 2 degrees. Lauren held his gaze for exactly as long as was reasonable, then looked down at her bag with the practiced calm of someone who had absolutely everything under control. "I'll have the preliminary concepts to your team by end of next week," she said. "Perfect." Reed picked up his jacket from the chair. "I'll look forward to the follow-up meeting." She walked to the elevator without rushing. She pressed the lobby button with a steady hand. She watched the floors descend on the small digital display, 32, 31, 30, and told herself with complete conviction that the warmth spreading across her collarbone was simply the building's heating system running too high for early spring. By the 22nd floor, she almost believed it. Outside, Manhattan swallowed her into its current, all glass and noise and purposeful motion. Lauren put her sunglasses on, adjusted her bag, and walked south toward Soho with the efficient stride of someone who had a company to run and absolutely no time for complications. Her phone buzzed, a calendar notification, Harmon Legal, follow-up, TBD. She dismissed it without slowing down. But somewhere beneath the blazer, beneath the composure, beneath every reasonable argument she was already constructing, something had shifted quietly, the way doors do when someone on the other side finally decides to knock.
Chapter 3.
The restaurant was called Arlo, tucked into a narrow West Village street that felt deliberately hidden, the kind of place that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. Exposed walnut tables, low pendant lighting, a wine list that assumed you knew what you were doing. Lauren had passed it 100 times and never gone in. Somehow it felt appropriate that the first time would be like this, a client dinner that had expanded organically from a working lunch that had itself begun as a 15-minute call that neither of them had ended on time. She arrived first. Of course she did. The host led her to a corner table set for 2, and Lauren settled in with the particular composure of someone mentally rehearsing the word professional like a mantra. She checked her phone, reviewed the project notes she absolutely did not need to review, ordered sparkling water, and told herself the ambient candlelight was simply a function of the restaurant's aesthetic and meant nothing whatsoever. Reed arrived 7 minutes later, slightly windblown from the street, wearing a charcoal wool coat over a dark navy shirt. No tie. He looked, Lauren thought with mild irritation, completely at ease in the way of someone who had never once in his life needed to rehearse composure. "Traffic on the bridge," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Sorry." "You're not late," she said. "No, but I like to be early." He picked up the menu, then looked at her over the top of it with that particular expression, the one she was beginning to catalogue against her better judgment. "You were early too." "I'm always early." "I know," he said simply, and went back to the menu. Lauren looked at her own menu and said nothing, because the alternative was asking how he already knew that, and asking that question felt like opening a window she wasn't ready to open. They ordered grilled halibut for her, short rib for him, a bottle of Burgundy that Reed selected, with the unhurried confidence she found simultaneously irritating and magnetic. The conversation began where it was supposed to, the Harmon rebrand, the typography decisions she'd been refining, the digital rollout timeline. Safe, structured, professional. It lasted approximately 40 minutes. "You designed that mural," Reed said, nodding toward her portfolio on the chair beside her. "The one in the Flatiron district, the geometric piece on the corner of 23rd. Lauren blinked. "How do you know that?" "I walked past it every morning for 2 years on my way to my old office." He swirled his wine slowly. I used to stand there for about 30 seconds before going in. It was the kind of thing that made the day feel less automatic. She looked at him. That's a very specific thing to remember. I remember things that matter, Reed said. Not performatively, just factually, the way someone states weather. The candle between them flickered in a draught Lauren couldn't locate. She took a sip of her wine, dark and warm with that particular burgundy quality of tasting like somewhere else entirely, and felt the conversation shift beneath her like a tide changing direction. Why law? She asked. The question surprised even her. Reed considered it genuinely, which she appreciated. I grew up watching people get steamrolled by systems they didn't understand, he said. My father was one of them. A contractor, good at his work, terrible at contracts. Lost everything on a project when I was 14 because someone buried a clause he didn't understand. He paused. I decided early that language was either a weapon or a shield, and I'd rather know how to use it. Lauren was quiet for a moment. That's not the answer I expected. What did you expect? Something about prestige or money. Those came later, he said, with a slight smile that acknowledged the honesty. The reason came first. She turned her wineglass slowly in her hands. Outside, the village moved in its quiet weekend cadence, couples walking dogs, a couple laughing outside a wine bar across the street, the particular softness that Manhattan reserved for streets too narrow for traffic to dominate. My mother was an accountant, Lauren said, not entirely sure why she was offering this. She wanted me to be practical. She used to say that art was beautiful, but beauty didn't pay mortgages. A beat. I proved her wrong eventually, but it took long enough that the victory felt more exhausting than triumphant. Reed looked at her the way she was learning. He looked at things that interested him, steadily, without rush. Do you still feel like you have to prove it? The question landed with quiet precision. Lauren met his eyes across the candlelight and felt something move in her chest. Not dramatically, not like the movies, but like a slow exhale after holding breath so long you'd forgotten you were doing it. Sometimes, she said. It was the most honest answer she'd given anyone in months. Reed nodded once, accepting it without commentary, without advice, just receiving it. Lauren found unexpectedly that this was the most intimate thing anyone had done in her presence in a very long time. The waiter appeared, cleared their plates, offered dessert menus neither of them took. The evening had reached that particular hour where the restaurant had thinned and the remaining conversations felt somehow more real. Lauren looked at her phone. 11:14 p.m. 3 hours. She'd been sitting across from Reed Callahan for 3 hours, and somewhere in the middle of Burgundy and building murals and fathers who lost everything to bad contracts, she had forgotten to monitor the distance. That realization, quiet and precise as a key turning in a lock, followed her all the way home through the dark West Village streets and settled in like something that had no intention of leaving.
Chapter 4.
The bar was called Footnote, a detail Lauren appreciated, given that it occupied the basement level of a building on Lexington Avenue and felt exactly like something you'd find at the bottom of a page, small, deliberately unhurried, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Dark wood paneling, leather bar stools worn soft with use, a jazz playlist running low enough to think over, the kind of place where conversations went longer than intended. They'd ended up here the way they kept ending up places together, organically, almost accidentally, through the particular gravity that had been building between them for weeks without either acknowledging it directly. A late project review that wrapped at 7, a mutual reluctance to go back to separate apartments on a Thursday that felt unfinished, a suggestion from Reed that landed casually enough to accept without it meaning anything, except that everything lately seemed to mean something. Lauren was on her second bourbon. Reed was nursing a scotch, jacket draped over the back of his stool, tie loosened exactly 1 inch, the Reed Callahan version of unwinding. The Harmon rebrand was ahead of schedule. The conversation had moved through work and out the other side into easier territory. A documentary they'd both watched, a bookstore on Prince Street that Lauren visited every Sunday, a hiking trail in the Catskills that Reed swore was worth the drive. Then he said it. You've been avoiding something for the last 4 weeks. Lauren looked at him over her glass. I've been delivering exceptional work on a tight timeline. Both can be true. He turned his scotch slowly on the bar. You like my company. You've been avoiding admitting that you like my company. The directness of it was so characteristic that she almost smiled. Almost. You're presumptuous, she said. I'm observant. His eyes held that particular steadiness. There's a difference. Is there? It wasn't a question. You laughed at the story about the Chicago deposition. He said it evenly, like evidence. You texted me the article about the Flatiron building renovation at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. You ordered the same wine we had at Arlo last week when you were out with your team. Priya mentioned it completely unprompted. Lauren set her glass down with deliberate calm. Priya talks too much. Lauren. The way he said her name, level, almost gentle, had a quality that made deflection feel suddenly exhausting. Just admit it. She looked at him. The bar light was warm and low, catching the angle of his jaw, the slight curve at the corner of his mouth that preceded every observation worth paying attention to. Outside, Lexington hummed its Thursday night frequency, taxis and footsteps and the city's eternal background percussion. She felt the admission sitting right there, just behind her sternum, obvious and inconvenient. I enjoy your company, she said, with the specific neutrality of someone conceding the minimum. You're a reasonably engaging person. Reed laughed, the real one, unhurried. Reasonably engaging. It's a compliment. It's a parole hearing response. He leaned forward slightly on the bar, closing the distance just enough to shift the geometry of the conversation. You know what I think? I think we're both doing this, enjoying something and refusing to say it out loud because saying it makes it real, and real things can go wrong. The accuracy of it was frankly annoying. Lauren turned her bourbon glass once. And what exactly are you suggesting? Reed's expression shifted, that slow transition she'd catalogued from professional to something unguarded and more dangerous. A bet, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Whoever admits their feelings first loses. He said it with the smile of someone completely confident in their self-control. No qualifications, no hedging. An actual direct admission. First one to say it loses. Lauren looked at him for a long moment. The rational part of her brain, the part that had built an agency from nothing through sheer strategic discipline, recognized this immediately as a game designed to burn both players. The other part, the part that had been running quietly beneath every professional interaction for weeks, leaned forward with unmistakable interest. You're serious, she said, completely. And what does losing look like exactly? Losing looks like being honest. His eyes didn't move from hers, which might be the only way either of us wins anything worth having. Lauren held his gaze across the warm amber light of the bar. Around them, Footnote continued its quiet operation. A couple laughing 2 stools down, the bartender replacing glasses on a shelf, the jazz finding its way through a bridge and out the other side. She extended her hand. Reed took it. His grip was warm and deliberate, and he held it exactly 1 second longer than a handshake required. Long enough to register, brief enough to be entirely deniable. Don't get comfortable, Lauren said. Likewise, Reed replied. She picked up her bourbon. He picked up his scotch. The bet existed now, solid and specific between them, and beneath the clean lines of its structure was something neither of them had addressed. The fact that the hand she'd extended to shake had still not entirely forgotten the warmth of his. Some bets were made to be lost. Both of them suspected this sitting in the basement bar on Lexington Avenue, the city moving overhead with complete indifference to the particular fire they had just decided to play with. Neither of them moved to leave.
Chapter 5.
It started with a message at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Reed had sent a photo, no caption, just an image. Lauren unlocked her phone in the dark of her apartment, the screen the only light in the room, and looked at it for a long moment. It was a photograph of a map. Not a digital one, a physical paper map, The kind you found in used bookstores, this one yellowed at the edges and covered in someone's handwritten annotations. Destinations circled, notes in the margins. A life's worth of intentions pressed into paper. She stared at it, then typed, "Where did you find that?" His response came in under a minute. "Estate sale in Brooklyn. Reminded me of something you said about the photographs." She sat up against her headboard. 3 weeks earlier, over coffee after a project review, she had mentioned, almost parenthetically, the way you mention things you don't realize matter, that she kept a folder on her laptop of places she'd never been. Not a bucket list, not aspirational, just images that had found her over the years and stayed. A fishing village in the Azores, a brutalist library in Kazakhstan, a particular street in Lisbon where the tiles were the specific blue of early morning. Places she carried around like quiet intentions she hadn't yet converted into action. She hadn't expected him to remember that. "You remembered," she typed. "I told you," he wrote back. "I remember things that matter." She set the phone face down on the nightstand, picked it up again 14 seconds later. That was the beginning of the late nights. Not dramatic, nothing so deliberate as a decision. Just conversations that started at reasonable hours and refused to end at them, moving through subjects with the unhurried momentum of two people who kept finding new rooms in each other. Reed, she discovered, played piano. Not performatively, not the kind of playing meant for audiences. He played alone late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the city outside had reduced itself to its essential frequency. He'd learned as a child, stopped in his 20s when life accelerated past the space for it, started again 3 years ago after a case that had taken 14 months and left him needing something that had nothing to do with language. "What do you play?" she asked one night, cross-legged on her couch with a glass of wine going warm on the coffee table. "Whatever the evening feels like," he wrote. Tonight was Satie. Lauren looked that up, put it on through her speaker, and sat in the dark, listening. The music was spare and interior, like thought rendered in sound, elegant without announcing itself. She understood immediately why Reed played it alone. She typed, "I get it," his response, "I thought you might." The Hamptons weekend was a business necessity, a client of Reed's with a property development project, a Saturday presentation that required both their inputs, an overnight that neither had engineered, but that circumstances had produced anyway. Lauren drove out Friday evening in her white Audi, Reed following in his own car, the Montauk Highway unspooling ahead of them through the flat gold light of late afternoon. The client's house was modern and glassed, sitting back from the beach behind dune grass that moved in the Atlantic wind, like something breathing. They worked through dinner, laptops open, the presentation taking shape across the dining table, while the ocean made its dark presence known beyond the windows. By Saturday afternoon the work was done, the client satisfied, the evening unexpectedly open. Reed found her on the beach at 5 o'clock. She'd walked down after the meeting ended, needing the specific kind of decompression that only moving air and open water provided. The Atlantic in early May had that grey-green quality, restless, serious, beautiful, in a way that didn't try to be picturesque. He came up beside her without announcement. They walked without immediate conversation, which was something Lauren had come to recognize as particular to Reed. His comfort with silence that didn't demand to be filled. The beach was empty in both directions. The light was doing what late afternoon light did at the coast, going horizontal, turning ordinary things gold and long-shadowed. "Can I ask you something?" Reed said. "You generally do, regardless," she said. He almost smiled. "The photographs, the places you've never been." He paused. "Why haven't you gone?" Lauren considered the question honestly. Because going alone felt like admitting something. Admitting what? She watched a wave complete itself on the shore. That I'd been waiting for the right time, or the right... She stopped. "Person?" Reed said quietly. She didn't answer. The wind came off the water and moved through her hair, and the silence between them was the specific kind that said more than most conversations. That was when it happened. Small, almost incidental, the way the most significant things often were. They were walking, and then they were stopped, and Reed's hand brushed hers, not accidentally, not quite intentionally. existing in that precise threshold between the two. His fingers grazed her knuckles, barely, the touch lasting less than 2 seconds before they both stilled. Neither of them moved apart. Neither moved closer. The ocean continued. The light continued. The dune grass bent and recovered. Lauren looked straight ahead at the water, her heartbeat doing something she refused to annotate. Beside her, Reed was equally still, and she understood without looking at him that he was having the same internal conversation she was. The bet was still in play. The rules were still technically intact, but standing on that beach in the horizontal light, their hands still close enough that the warmth between them hadn't dissipated, Lauren understood something with sudden and inconvenient clarity. That there was a difference between not losing a bet and not already being lost. The Atlantic offered no opinion. The evening moved toward dark. Neither of them stepped away.
Chapter 6.
The rain arrived without the courtesy of a warning. One moment the sky above Midtown was the usual pewter gray of a New York evening in transition, and the next it was doing what Manhattan rain did best, committing completely, without negotiation, turning sidewalks into mirrors and sending everyone into the particular scramble of a city, caught without umbrellas. Lauren stood under the narrow overhang of a building on 54th Street, her phone open on the Uber app, showing a 13-minute wait rendered in the specific red color that meant the universe was not cooperating. Reed appeared beside her 30 seconds later, jacket pulled up uselessly against the rain, looking at his own phone with the expression of someone receiving the same information. 15 minutes, he said. 13, she said. Mine's worse. We could share. We're going opposite directions, are we? It wasn't quite a question. He looked at her sideways, rain dripping from the edge of his collar. The client dinner ended an hour ago. You've been walking around Midtown in the wrong direction for your apartment for 40 minutes, Lauren. She opened her mouth, closed it. The rain intensified as if providing editorial emphasis. I needed air, she said finally. In the rain. I didn't know it was going to rain. Reed said nothing, which was somehow more effective than anything he could have said. A cab materialized, already occupied. The Uber app updated, 17 minutes now. The city had apparently decided to be maximally unhelpful. There's a hotel bar, Reed said, nodding toward the building behind them. The Langham, we could wait it out. Lauren looked at the rain, looked at her phone, looked at the 17-minute estimate, with the specific despair of someone whose shoes were already losing the battle against the pavement. Fine, she said. 1 drink. The Langham's bar occupied the lobby level, all warm marble and low amber lighting, the kind of interior that felt deliberately removed from whatever was happening outside. The rain was audible against the tall windows but distant, like weather happening to someone else. They took a corner seat, ordered without extensive deliberation. Bourbon for her, scotch for him, the pattern so established now it required no discussion. The conversation moved easily, the way it always did. A shared post-mortem of the client dinner, the particular comedy of the senior partner's extended anecdote about a golf tournament no one had asked about, the way Reed had redirected the conversation with such elegant precision that Lauren had been the only one who noticed. That was impressive, she said. The redirect. 16 years of depositions, he said. You learn to steer. Is that what you do with me? She said it lightly, but the question carried more weight than the tone suggested. Reed looked at her steadily. With you, he said, I have never once known which direction we're going. The admission was quiet and exact, and Lauren felt it settle somewhere beneath her sternum. Outside, the rain continued its committed performance. The bar had thinned to a handful of other people, a couple near the window, 2 men in suits at the bar engaged in the universal language of business travel complaints. When they finally moved toward the elevator, Reed's room was on the 6th floor. Her cab had materialized at last, according to her phone. The corridor off the lobby was quiet in the particular way of hotel spaces after 10 p.m. Warm light, patterned carpet, the soft mechanical hum of a building in its evening mode. They stopped at the point where the corridor branched, her route to the exit, his to the elevator. The logical geography of goodnight, except neither of them moved through it. Lauren looked up at him. Reed looked down at her, And the distance between them, which had been managed so carefully, so consistently, for weeks of late-night messages and beach walks and deliberate almost touches, simply stopped being the distance it was supposed to be. He leaned forward, slow, deliberate. The kind of movement that asked a question before completing itself. His forehead came to rest against hers, gently, with the specific weight of something that had been held back a long time, and Lauren felt her eyes close in the half-second before she remembered to keep them open. His breath was warm and close. She could feel the slight tension in him, the same restraint she was exercising, both of them suspended in that precise threshold that was more intimate than anything that came before it. His hand came up, not touching, just present, hovering at the edge of her jaw with an intention so clear it was almost sound. Lauren's heart made a decision her brain was still drafting the memo on. Then his phone rang. The sound was catastrophically ordinary. His standard ringtone, some client whose timing was historically terrible. Reed pulled back by inches, his jaw tightening once with the expression of a man exercising profound self-control. He glanced at the screen, something professional, necessary, impossible to ignore at this hour without consequence. He looked at her. "I have to go," she said. Her voice was remarkably even. "Take it." He held her gaze for one more second, long enough to say everything the phone call had interrupted, then stepped back and answered, his professional register reassembling itself with the practiced fluency of long habit. Lauren walked to the exit. The cab was waiting, engine running, wipers moving steadily against the rain. She got in, gave her address, and looked straight ahead as the Langham disappeared behind her. The city slid past the windows in streaks of wet light, yellow and red, and the particular blue-white of phone screens on night buses. Lauren pressed her fingers to her own forehead, exactly where his had rested, and felt the warmth still there, like something that hadn't decided to leave yet. Across Manhattan, in a hotel corridor on the 6th floor, she knew with complete certainty that Reed Callahan was standing with a phone to his ear, finishing a conversation he wasn't thinking about. She knew because she wouldn't have been thinking about it either. The cab moved south. The rain continued. The city carried them both in opposite directions through the dark, indifferent and luminous, while the almost settled over them like a second skin neither had agreed to wear, and neither, if they were being completely honest, wanted to take off.
Chapter 7.
The event was called Connections, which Lauren had always found aggressively on the nose for a networking function, but the design industry ran on them, and declining too many meant becoming invisible in ways that had professional consequences. The venue was a converted gallery space in Chelsea, all white walls and strategic lighting, the kind of place that made everyone look slightly more interesting than they actually were. She arrived with Daniel. This required no particular explanation. Daniel Reeves was her oldest friend in the industry, a photographer she'd known since her first freelance years, easy company, and zero complication. They had the specific comfort of people who had long since established that their friendship was exactly what it was and nothing more. He made her laugh. He knew everyone. He was, in the language of these events, an ideal companion. Reed arrived 40 minutes later. Lauren didn't see him come in. She was mid-conversation near the far wall, a glass of white wine in hand, laughing at something Daniel had said about a particularly catastrophic shoot in Iceland that had involved a malfunctioning drone and an extremely unimpressed horse. Daniel's hand rested on her shoulder briefly, punctuating the story, the easy physical language of old friendship. From across the room, Reed saw all of this. He registered it the way you register something unexpected in peripheral vision, a slight recalibration, an involuntary sharpening of attention. Lauren in a deep green dress he hadn't seen before. Lauren laughing with her whole face, the way she did when something genuinely caught her off guard. Lauren with a man whose hand rested on her shoulder with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had earned that proximity. Reed took a drink from the glass a passing waiter provided without fully tasting it. He knew with the rational clarity he applied professionally to everything that he had no standing here. They had a bet. They had late nights and a beach where fingers had briefly touched, and a hotel corridor where a phone had rung at the worst possible moment. They had everything that existed in the space between acknowledgement and declaration, which was, technically, nothing he could lay claim to. He knew all of this. It didn't particularly help. He moved through the room with the practiced ease of someone who had attended 1,000 of these events, conversations initiated and concluded with professional fluency, business cards exchanged, the social choreography executed without visible effort. He was good at rooms. He had always been good at rooms. He was not, it turned out, good at rooms that contained Lauren laughing at another man's stories. Lauren noticed the shift before she identified its source. She spotted Reed from across the gallery during a conversation with an architect she'd collaborated with twice, caught him in profile, speaking with two people she didn't recognize, his expression composed and unrevealing. She raised her hand slightly in acknowledgement when his eyes moved in her direction. He nodded once, looked away. The nod was correct, appropriate. The exact gesture of a professional acquaintance at a mutual event. It was also unmistakably wrong. Not in any way she could have explained to someone who hadn't spent the last 2 months cataloguing the precise vocabulary of Reed Callahan's expressions, but wrong in the way that something tuned carefully goes suddenly flat. She finished her conversation, looked for him again. He was gone from that corner. For the remainder of the evening, they occupied the same room with the specific politeness of two people actively not seeking each other out, which was its own kind of seeking. Lauren talked to 7 people and remembered approximately 2 of the conversations. Daniel, attuned to her in the way of long friendship, raised an eyebrow at her once and received a look that discouraged the question. At 9:30, she found Reed near the exit, pulling on his coat. "Leaving," she said. "Early meeting." His voice was even and pleasant and told her absolutely nothing. "Good event. You've been strange all evening." A pause, brief but present. "I've been professional all evening. With me, you're never just professional." She said it quietly, without accusation. "That's the whole problem, Reed." Something moved across his expression, quickly, like weather passing. He looked at her with the controlled steadiness she recognized as the thing he deployed when the honest version of himself was pushing against the managed one. "Who's the photographer?" he said. The question was level, almost casual, which made it more revealing than anger would have been. Lauren looked at him for a long moment. Understanding arrived with the particular clarity of something you'd been waiting to see confirm itself. "Daniel," she said. "We've been friends for 11 years. He shoots campaigns for my agency. He's been in a relationship with a sculptor named Marcus for 4 of those years, and they just adopted a dog named Brutus." She paused. "Is there anything else you'd like documented?" Reed said nothing. His jaw moved once. "You don't have a name for what you're feeling right now," Lauren said, keeping her voice low, even, precise. "I know because I don't either, but it has very specific symptoms." She picked up her coat from the rack beside the door. "Good night, Reed." She walked out into the Chelsea night, the street cool and quiet after the noise of the gallery, the city resuming its indifferent operations around her. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. She looked at the screen. A message from Reed. "I'm sorry, that was unreasonable." She typed back, "Yes." 3 dots appeared, indicating he was writing something. They pulsed for a long moment, long enough that whatever he was composing was either complicated or being revised. Then they disappeared. No message came. Lauren pocketed her phone and walked toward the subway, heels quiet on the pavement. The absence of that message sat heavier than most things that had actually been said between them. A silence with shape and weight, pressing against the inside of her chest the whole ride home. The next morning, his name appeared on her phone with a single line. "Lunch? I owe you an explanation that's better than a text." She stared at it for a full minute before answering. Then she typed, "Wednesday, you're buying."
Chapter 8.
Chicago arrived grey and serious, the way it did in late October. Lake Michigan asserting its authority over the skyline, wind moving through the downtown corridor with a directness that made Manhattan feel polite by comparison. Lauren had always liked Chicago for exactly this quality. It didn't perform, it simply was, with a kind of architectural confidence that she found professionally inspiring and personally reassuring. They'd flown out separately, Reed on an early flight, Lauren on a noon departure, and spent the day in back-to-back client meetings at a firm considering Harmon Legal as outside counsel for a significant expansion. The work was substantial, and the meetings were long, and by 7 p.m. they had both earned the particular exhaustion that came not from physical effort, but from being fully present in a room for 8 consecutive hours. Reed had found the bar by accident, or said he had, which Lauren now understood to mean he had researched it carefully and preferred the fiction of spontaneity. It was called Lakeview, which was accurate, a quiet space on the 32nd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, floor-to-ceiling windows running the full length of the room. Lake Michigan spread below and beyond, like something that had decided to be an ocean and nobody had corrected it. They took a table by the window, ordered without the menu, bourbon, scotch, the ritual so established it felt like punctuation. For a while they talked about the day, the Chicago clients, the subtle power dynamics of the meeting, a moment in the afternoon session where Reed had deployed a particular silence so effectively that the opposing counsel had filled it with 3 unnecessary admissions. Lauren had watched it happen in real time and still found it impressive in retrospect. "You do that on purpose," she said. The silence. "Most people are uncomfortable enough with silence that they'll say almost anything to end it," Reed said. "In a deposition that's useful, in a conversation—" He paused. "In a conversation, it's something I try not to do." "Try," she noted. "Try," he confirmed, with the slight honesty of someone not claiming more than he'd earned. The lake moved below them, dark and immense, lit at its edges by the city's reflection. A boat's lights moved slowly across the middle distance, patient, purposeful, indifferent to the weather. Then Reed set his glass down with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been deciding something for a while. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Not for the bet, not strategically, just actually." Lauren looked at him. The bar light was low and warm, catching the angles of his face with the particular honesty that late evenings and good bourbon produced. She said nothing, which was her version of the space he'd described, room made deliberately, offered without condition. "I'm afraid of being the person who ruins things," Reed said. "Not professionally. I'm reasonably competent there." A beat. "Personally, I have a specific history of arriving in situations that matter and not destroying them exactly, but not protecting them either, letting them erode because I couldn't decide if I deserved to hold on to them." He said it without self-pity, which made it land harder than self-pity would have. Lauren recognized the register, the voice of someone who had examined something about themselves long enough that the examination had become its own kind of damage. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "A relationship. 5 years ago." He turned his glass once. "She was extraordinary. We were together 3 years. I worked. I prioritized the wrong things with the consistency of someone who believed there would always be more time." He paused. "There wasn't. She didn't leave dramatically. She just stopped waiting. One morning I woke up and realized I'd been so focused on building a life that I'd forgotten to actually live in it." The lake was silent below them. Lauren held the weight of what he'd said without rushing past it. "I learned something from that," Reed continued, "that I could be excellent at everything that could be measured and completely inadequate at everything that couldn't." He looked at her directly. "And then I met you, and every instinct I have says this matters, and that terrifies me in a way that nothing in a courtroom ever has." Lauren was quiet for a long moment, not the managed quiet of deflection, but the real kind, the kind that meant she was deciding how much of herself to bring into the room. "I grew up watching my mother love things cautiously," she said finally. "Cautiously enough that I'm not sure she ever fully had them." She looked at the lake. "I learned early that wanting something completely meant it could be taken completely. So I became very good at wanting things partially." A pause. "My work was the exception. I gave that everything. People got a managed version. A curated version," Reed said softly, not critically, recognizing. "Yes." She looked at him. "And I am aware, sitting here, that I have been curating very deliberately for the last 2 months. "So have I," he said. The admission sat between them, not dramatic, not cinematic, just Two people in a bar above a lake in a city that didn't perform, telling each other something true. It wasn't a declaration. It was something more fragile than that, and more valuable. The specific vulnerability of showing someone the actual mechanism behind the composed exterior, the wiring beneath the architecture. Lauren looked at Reed across the low light and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not the flutter of attraction which she'd been managing for weeks, but something quieter and more structural. The sensation of being known. Not entirely, not yet. But known in the direction of entirely, which was its own particular gravity. She smiled, small, involuntary, the kind that happened before the decision to smile had been made. Reed saw it. Something in his expression changed, softened, almost imperceptibly, like a room when someone opens a window and the air comes in and rearranges everything quietly. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Outside, Chicago continued its serious, beautiful operations. The lake moving in the dark, the city holding its grid of light against the October sky, the wind finding every gap between buildings with characteristic Midwestern directness. Inside, the bourbon sat warm and largely forgotten, and two people who had spent 2 months managing distance discovered, without quite deciding to, that the distance had already closed, and that neither of them had noticed exactly when.
Chapter 9.
New York received them back the way it always did. Without ceremony, without acknowledgement that anything had changed, the city's magnificent indifference operating at full capacity on a Tuesday morning when Lauren's cab moved through the Midtown Tunnel and deposited her back into the particular velocity of her life. She had 3 days of deferred emails, a campaign presentation on Friday, 2 client calls stacked on Wednesday afternoon, the Harmon rebrand entering its final phase, which meant the professional proximity to Reed that had structured the last 2 months was approaching its natural conclusion with the quiet inevitability of a lease expiring. She told herself this was fine, manageable, that Chicago had been honest and important, and that honest, important things could exist without demanding immediate action. She told herself this with the specific conviction of someone who no longer entirely believed it. The Los Angeles proposal arrived Thursday morning, forwarded by her business attorney, with a note that said serious offer, serious timeline, worth your full attention. A boutique agency in Silver Lake, design forward, well-funded, expanding its brand strategy division. They wanted Lauren not as a contractor, but as a creative director. 6 months minimum, with a partnership conversation at the end of it if the fit was mutual. She read it twice at her desk while her coffee went cold. It was objectively exceptional. The kind of offer that arrived once and didn't wait. Los Angeles meant sun and space and the particular creative energy of a city that moved differently, slower in some ways, more experimental in others. It meant distance from the patterns she'd built in Manhattan, from the managed rhythms of her current life. It meant distance from Reed. She didn't call anyone. She opened a new document and started a pros and cons list with the disciplined practicality of someone making a business decision, which was how she handled things that felt too large to hold emotionally. The list was thorough. The professional column filled quickly. The personal column had 1 entry. She stared at it for a long time, then closed the laptop. She hadn't told Reed. There was no specific reason not to. They spoke regularly, worked together daily in the final stretch of the Harmon project, had dinner twice in the week since Chicago, with the particular ease of people who had stopped pretending the dinners were logistical necessities. But something made her hold it quietly, the way you hold something fragile before deciding whether to show it to someone who might change how you see it. He found out on Friday. She learned this at 8:47 p.m., when her studio buzzer sounded in the specific pattern of someone pressing it once, waiting, pressing again. Not aggressive, just present. She looked at the security monitor. Reed stood on the sidewalk below in his work coat, a manila folder under his arm that was transparently unnecessary, his face carrying the careful composure of someone who had been composing himself during the cab ride over. She buzzed him in without speaking through the intercom. He came up the stairs rather than the elevator. She heard his footsteps on the metal treads, unhurried but deliberate. When she opened the door, He was already on the landing, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the threshold with the accumulated weight of 2 months of almost. "I left a file," he said, holding up the folder. "Project specs. Thought you might need them for the final presentation." Lauren leaned against the doorframe. "Reed, the final presentation is digital. You emailed me everything Wednesday." A beat. His jaw moved once. "I know. So the file is a pretext." "The file," he said quietly, "is a genuinely transparent pretext, yes." She stepped back from the door. He came in, her studio at night, warm lamplight and the organized evidence of her work everywhere. The large windows showing the Soho street below still moving with its Friday night frequency. He set the folder on her entry table without pretending further, turned to face her, and looked at her the way she had been looked at only twice before in her life, with the full, unmanaged attention of someone for whom the looking was itself an admission. Lauren. Just her name. That was all. But the way he said it, with the specific quality of someone finally setting down something heavy, the careful control giving way to something that had been pressing against it for a very long time, made the single word carry the weight of every conversation they'd had and every one they'd avoided. She felt it move through her like a key finding its lock. "You heard about Los Angeles," she said. "Marcus mentioned it, completely inadvertently." He paused. "Is it real?" "It's a real offer. Are you going to take it?" The question was level, but beneath the level surface she could hear everything he wasn't allowing himself to say. The bet technically still intact, the rules technically still operative, both of them standing in her studio at 9 p.m. on a Friday, with a manila folder neither of them cared about, and 2 months of accumulated everything pressing against the walls of the space between them. "I haven't decided," she said honestly. Reed moved, not dramatically, not suddenly, but with the deliberate intention of someone crossing the last distance of a very long journey. He stopped close enough that she could see the precise moment his composure finished its work, and something realer replaced it. "I know the rules," he said quietly. "I know what losing means. Reed, I also know that you are possibly about to move 3,000 miles away, and I am standing in your studio at 9 o'clock at night holding a folder of documents I don't need, and I find that I am completely out of interest in being careful." Lauren looked at him, at the line of his jaw, at the steadiness of his eyes, at the particular expression of someone who had made a decision and found it clarifying rather than frightening. Her heart was doing something she had given up annotating weeks ago. The bet was a technicality now. They both knew it. What Reed had just said was not the explicit declaration the rules required, but it was everything surrounding it, the entire country of feeling with the capital city left unnamed. And standing in its borders, Lauren understood with sudden and complete certainty that the geography had already been decided. Whatever she said next would change the coordinates of her life. The studio was quiet. Soho moved below them, luminous and indifferent. The manila folder sat on the entry table like a footnote to something that had already been written. She looked at Reed Callahan and felt the decision, not arriving, but already present, having apparently been there for some time, simply waiting for her to stop moving long enough to recognize it.
Chapter 10.
The rooftop belonged to Reed's building, a detail Lauren had somehow never encountered in 2 months of knowing him, which felt appropriate given how much of him had revealed itself gradually, in layers, like a city that kept producing new streets the longer you walked it. He'd mentioned it once, briefly, in the context of something else entirely, and she had filed it without knowing she was filing it. He texted at 5:30 on a Saturday. "Come up at 7. Bring nothing." She arrived at 7:03, her version of exactly on time, wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored jacket, hair down, no portfolio bag, no professional armor of any kind. The elevator opened directly onto the rooftop level, and when the doors parted, she stepped into the particular magic that Manhattan rooftops produced at dusk. The city spread in every direction, like a conversation happening simultaneously in 1,000 different registers, the sky above it going through its evening transitions with the unhurried confidence of something that had been doing this for a very long time. Reed was already there. A small table had been set near the western parapet. Nothing elaborate, nothing performed. A bottle of wine, 2 glasses, a candle in a glass holder, negotiating bravely with the evening breeze. He was standing at the edge looking out at the city when she came through the door, and he turned at the sound of her footsteps with an expression that she recognized immediately as the one she'd been cataloguing since the beginning. Open, unmanaged, the Reed that existed on the other side of all the professional composure. "You came," he said. "You said bring nothing," she said. "That's the easiest instruction you've given me in 2 months." He smiled, the real one, slow and complete, and poured the wine. They stood at the parapet for a while without sitting, the city doing what the city did at this hour, converting its daytime grey into something luminous and specific. The Hudson was visible to the west, catching the last of the light in long horizontal strokes. Downtown's geometry rose to the south, the new towers and the old ones existing in the particular democracy, of a skyline that absorbed everything without losing its character. Lauren held her wine and felt the week's accumulated tension release from her shoulders in increments. The Los Angeles decision still unresolved, the Harmon project effectively complete, the strange, suspended quality of the last 72 hours since Reed had appeared at her studio door with his transparent folder and his barely contained honesty. "I've been thinking about what you said," she offered. "Thursday night. Which part?" "The part where you said you were out of interest in being careful." Reed turned to look at her. The evening light was doing what it had done on the Hamptons beach, going horizontal, making everything feel more significant and more honest than ordinary lighting allowed. "I meant it," he said simply. "I know you did." Lauren turned her wineglass slowly. "That's what I've been thinking about." Below them, the city moved through its early evening configurations. The shift change between the day crowd and the night crowd, the particular energy of a Saturday in New York, when the week's obligations had released their hold, and something looser and more human took their place. "I'm not taking the Los Angeles offer," Lauren said. Reed was quiet for a moment. "Lauren, I made the decision before Thursday," she said, which was true in the way that important decisions were often true, not at the moment of making, but at the moment of recognizing what had already been made. "I just needed to understand why I was making it." She looked at him directly. "I understand why now." The candle on the table behind them bent in a gust of wind and recovered. Reed looked at her with the full attention she'd come to understand was his most characteristic quality. Not the intelligence, not the composure, but this, the ability to be completely present with another person, without reservation or performance. "The bet," he said. "The bet," she agreed. They looked at each other across the evening air, and something passed between them that had the quality of the last chapter of a very long book, the specific emotion of arriving somewhere you had been traveling toward for a long time and recognizing the destination not because it's what you expected, but because it feels with unexpected completeness like somewhere you already know. Reed set his wineglass on the parapet ledge, turned to face her fully, and in the voice she had memorized without intending to, the one stripped of professional register, the one that existed only in late-night messages and hotel corridors and bars above Midwestern lakes, he said, "I'm in love with you. I have been for a while. The bet is yours to win." A pause, and then the slight curve at the corner of his mouth, the smile she had catalogued first and understood last. "I find I don't mind losing." Lauren looked at him for one long, clear moment, at everything she had spent 2 months studying and resisting and returning to regardless, at the version of Reed Callahan that existed when he stopped managing the distance and simply stood in the actual room with her. She laughed first, unexpected, genuine, the kind that arrived before dignity could intervene. Then something else moved through her, quieter and more definitive, and her eyes filled briefly in the way they did when something true arrived after a long time of being carefully avoided. She stepped forward, closed the remaining distance with the intention of someone who had made a decision all the way down to the foundation, and kissed him with the specific completeness of everything that had almost happened in hotel corridors and on beaches and in bars above lakes, all of it arriving simultaneously, unhurried and absolute. He kissed her back like someone who had been waiting with complete patience and zero resignation. his hand coming up to her face with a gentleness that undid her more than urgency would have. When they finally separated, the city was fully lit below them, millions of windows becoming their own kind of constellation, the Hudson dark and silver, the sky above them having completed its transition to the particular deep blue that Manhattan evenings reserved for their best moments. "I lost," Lauren said, against the small remaining distance between them. "You lost," Reed agreed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone once, slowly. "How does it feel?" She considered the city below her, the rooftop, the candle that had survived the wind, the wine glass she'd set down somewhere without noticing, the man in front of her who had known about a mural she'd painted and remembered photographs of places she'd never been, and shown up at her door with a folder full of documents neither of them needed, because he had run finally out of careful. "Like winning," she said. Reed smiled, entirely without reservation, the way she suspected he smiled when no one was watching. And the apartment was quiet and the piano was playing something that felt like the evening. He pulled her close with the ease of something that had always been inevitable, and Lauren went without resistance, her forehead against his jaw, the city spread beneath them in all its luminous, indifferent, magnificent entirety. Somewhere in his apartment, in a dry cleaning bag at the back of the closet, a charcoal Tom Ford jacket held a faded scarlet stain on its left lapel, the specific geography of an accident that had turned out to be the most precise thing either of them had ever done. The bet was over. The city continued. And on a rooftop in lower Manhattan, as the Saturday night found its full frequency below them, two people who had spent 2 months being careful about something inevitable discovered what was already true, that some losses were the only victories worth having, and that the best stories rarely began the way you planned them. They began sometimes with a spilled glass of wine and a stranger's eyes, and the quiet, radical decision to stay in the conversation 1 moment longer than was safe. Lauren never planned to fall. She had spent years perfecting the art of almost trusting, almost staying, almost letting someone close enough to matter. And then one spilled glass of wine changed the architecture of everything. Reed didn't arrive loudly. He arrived consistently, in late-night messages and quiet beaches and a hotel corridor where the distance between them stopped making sense. He showed up at her door with a folder full of nothing, because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is run out of excuses to stay away. The bet was never about pride. It was about two people who were both already lost, too stubborn to be the first one found. And maybe that's the thing about real love. It doesn't announce itself, it just quietly becomes the reason you stop running. If this story moved you, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from today.